Good morning. I'm Starlett Massey, and we are here with Masheika Allgood. She is an AI ethicist and the founder of AIIAI Consulting. She began her career as an attorney in Florida and has worked in tech since 2015, where she worked in California as an AI ethicist for one of the largest AI corporations in the world. She is also one of my best friends, and 2024 will be our 20th year of friendship.
You aged me. I
We
mean, I
are
know I look old.
we are that old. Uh, I am the founder and owner of Massey Law Group here in St. Pete, and we're offering this free CLE for Florida attorneys because we believe that the education Masheika is going to provide today is critical for lawyers in the practice of law. Today's session is going to be a very broad overview where you'll learn the basics about AI and the risks associated with the application of AI to the law. We're going to have a follow-up session, again, another free CLE, at 11 a.m. Eastern on Friday, July 21st. That will be a broad overview about how AI affects our clients. And the third in the series and the final will be on July 27th. And we'll talk about AI's impact on society. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will try to get them addressed. It's going to be a very fast-paced hour. There is way more information than she can provide in an hour, but at least we might know more about what we don't know. So put them in the chat. If we don't get to your question today, we will attempt to have Masheika answer them over the coming days on Massey Law Group's LinkedIn page. So with that, Masheika, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Starlet. Now that everyone knows I'm sufficiently old, we can go ahead and start without pretense. We'll share my screen. Awesome. Okay. In my Zoom, I'm going to make it to where the speaker only sees. No, that's not it. There we go. All right. So we've got you up in the corner. Awesome. Okay, so welcome to RCLE. This is a moderated presentation in that I sometimes get a little techie, sometimes talk a little fast. Starlet is going to jump in and ask all the right questions at the right times. And hopefully in that way, we both get a better or we all get a better understanding of the impact of artificial intelligence on the practice of law. So I guess we start this conversation with how AI works. I have a CLA on what is AI and how it works. It's a dedicated hour, 15 minutes, I believe, or an hour on this technology and how it works, trying to break it down to make it very accessible. We've got to hit it very quickly, but there's always an opportunity for you to get a deeper understanding later. So underneath all the bells and whistles, AI is just a system for looking for patterns and probabilities in data. It just does it faster and with more data than we can because computers. So for all the talk about AI sentience and understanding, at its core, what we're talking about is computers doing statistics and developing patterns. What you see on this slide is a representation of the core functionality at the heart of AI, which is the hidden simulation. When you create a model to classify cats, the learning process is essentially the model creating an internal representation of a cat by breaking the image of a cat down into various features, mapping the relationships of those features, and then weighing those relationships based on their importance. So the cat on the left becomes a cluster of weighted features that you see on the right. AI does that for every entity it encounters in a data set. Each entity becomes a feature cluster, put all the feature clusters together, and it creates an internal representation of the world. Well, the part of the world that the system sees, which is whatever version of reality is presented by the training data. So those little clusters are different things that indicate what makes up an ear, or what makes up an eye, or a paw, and then where the paw is in relation to the eye and the ear. That's essentially what the feature representation is. So the big question is, how does this relate to ChatGPT, right? And the AI that we're all hearing about. So ChatGPT uses an AI method called natural language processing, which is NLP. Up until about 10 years ago, NLP was the most boring field in AI. It basically requires you to feed an AI model enough words for it to see relationships between those words. Over the last 10 years, compute capacity with cloud computing, distributed computing has exploded. So now we can feed an AI system massive categories of words. In the case of ChatGPT, it was fed the entire internet. ChatGPT uses the same basic process as autocorrect on your cell phone. It makes a map of all the words in the data set and generates statistics on how often words occur in the same context and how frequently words appear in close proximity to each other. So the NLP system in your cell phone was trained on a defined set of data, and it has the ability to guess the next word. ChatGPT was trained on the entire internet. It has way more compute power behind it, way more storage, way more memory. So it has much more complex patterns to pull from. It can guess or predict the next sentence and whole paragraphs. So this is the technology, not necessarily ChatGPT in and of itself, but this natural language processing technology that underpins the AI that's used in legal tools. So let's take a look at how it's being used in legal tools. Starlett hammered me on this. She's like, "Oh, lawyers aren't using AI in this way." And I was like, "Oh, I believe they are." So I have a list here of different kinds of ways that we're using AI in legal applications. The first thing I want to head on is that it's very important to understand that this tech, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, has been around since the 50s. The first AI company was the Semiotics Corporation, which was incorporated in the 50s, right? So the technology itself was not built for law. It was built for technology, right? Actually, initially it was built for military purposes, but simulation technology, and it's been targeted to the law because they found uses for it. So just to run off a list, AI is being used for document review, predictive analytics for case outcomes and for risk assessment, legal research, contract analysis and management, e-discovery, identification and classification, compliance monitoring, intellectual property, process automation and search, litigation analysis, sentiment analysis, and document drafting. So basically, I'm sorry, Starlett, question.
So if AI has been around since the 50s and had alternative purposes to the law when it was developed, you're saying it wasn't developed for lawyers and they haven't specifically developed it for lawyers really in any context. Are there any major downsides to AI being integrated into the field now?
So what you said is move to the next slide. So there are, hold on, I can't find my slide now. It was such a pretty segue, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so there are risks associated with using this technology in the law, right? If on my last slide, I have links to different examples of technology being used in those areas. When you click on some of those links, you'll see that the uses for the technology, they'll have laws of use case, but they're also like, oh, we can help you with your systems for your grocery store, right? Like it's very broad, the pattern of usage that they're using this technology for. And that's a really big point because we assume that lawyers are in the room, lawyers are making decisions, we're telling people what we want them to build, and they're building for us. But they're not. This is general purpose technology, and they found that it can be used in legal applications. So when you take a technology out of its, broad usage and you push it into the law, there are going to be some risk, right? So there's 4 categories, there's 2 slides. We'll talk briefly about bias and fairness, right? The risk of bias is that machine learning models are not inherently objective, right? They are trained on data. There is bias within that data. All of human data has biases of the people who put it together or how we've treated each other. It's a record of how we treat each other, and we treat each other with various levels of bias, right? There is a difference between social bias and technical bias. And we are often trying to use AI systems to technically solve social bias problems, right? So we're looking at, can we make the statistics fairer, but the underlying bias in society is the problem, not the technical issue of the statistics, right? So I have this little link here around risk scores, and there was a study done where in one of the states where they were given risk scores, and they were saying, oh, risk scores should make, or using AI generated risk scores should make sentencing fairer for everyone. It seems that the judges had their own personal bias, and they found that they often would ignore the AI output and overcompensate in terms of making penalties harsher for Black people who are being sentenced than for white people. So they would go with the sentencing recommendation when there was a white defendant, but they would override it and be harsher when there was a Black defendant, because your social bias has not been solved by the technical bias, right? And then there's an issue of automation bias and automation complacency, which is basically we assume that we're not smarter than machines. So even if we know, like our gut tells us this machine is flat out wrong, we will believe the machine and we will not be willing to overrule it, right?
I mean,
Um,
it's kind of like how, people are with their doctors, especially if you're less sophisticated. You trust the doctor, they have the license. It sounds like it's becoming automated in, human response to AI, that we're going to trust the AI knows more than we do because it has the knowledge of the whole internet at its disposal.
yeah, we don't really have, and humans don't have an inherent understanding of how to, like I can look at a person and have a feeling of if they're telling me the truth, right? Like we've over time created systems culturally that are inherent in how we see other people that can give us a clue of if someone's telling the truth or not. The AI systems, we don't have that ability, right? And so we just assume that it's technology, it must be right. And so it just it's hard for us to put ourselves in a position of authority over the machine, make decisions that are against that machine. And I do, in the issue of bias, I want to be very clear. I brought up a case of race, but bias doesn't always have to be related to a social factor, right? It can also be about efficiency. Um,
About what?
developers efficiency. Developers and AI machines can bias to metrics that best fit the data they have, right? So an AI system, if it has a lot of data about one particular thing and a little data about other particular things, it will push the neurons towards the data that everyone's asking about, right? Like I need to be really efficient about the answers that I'm asked all the time. But the data on the fringes gets less attention and less compute power, right? So the AI system is biasing towards the things that it knows the most about or is asked the most about, as opposed to things that it's asked very, very rarely. So there's different kinds of bias. It's not always about people, but there is bias in machine learning. And then I want to talk a bit about fairness. So fairness in the context of the law, according to Teague v. Lane, is we would rather index to allowing a guilty person to go free than to have an innocent person be jailed. Like that is a core value in the law, right? In the US as it's presented right now. So in AI or statistical terms, that's called specificity, right? Like you want to bias to making sure that you are not getting people who shouldn't be in that class, right? Uh, but that's not necessarily the bias measure that's going to be used by the AI system that you bring in, right? If you're not having that conversation, they could be looking at a different measure of bias, right? When you talk about fairness with developers, there are like 30 different metrics for fairness. And there's a disconnect between what is legal fairness, what is technical fairness, what is organizational, what as an organization do we believe fairness is? And that conversation is not necessarily happening. But then we've got this notion of algorithmic fairness that sits on top of, right? And so that there's a gap between all of those. And so when we say an AI system is fair, that doesn't actually mean anything, right? Because the definition is amorphous. And
We almost need a translator specific to the practice of law and the development of AI tools for lawyers, right? Because
yes,
we're going to assume the word fair in a product marketed to lawyers is relying on the legal definition of fairness. So
yes.
if a product, and we won't name any specific products, although I've
Hmm.
certainly used and tried a few with less than successful results, so I
Hmm.
have bias. Um, we're not, are lawyers involved in the development of AI tools to the extent that how the AI tool implements fairness is measured in accordance with legal fairness? Are we involved at that level of the algorithm, we as lawyers?
So the answer is no. And we'll talk at the end of the presentation on how we could possibly be involved. But the short answer is no. And the long answer is no. We're not at the table. We're not setting these rules. And I want to speak briefly about group fairness and the trade-off of group fairness, because I think you're not gonna like this very much, but when an AI system is asked to be fair according to a metric, right? The understanding is that the overall metric needs to be met, right? So I need to do specificity, right? I need to make sure that I am not bringing people in this class who shouldn't be in this class. And so when you look at the fairness metric from the broad strokes across the entire data set, it's going to hit that metric. But what we found is when you actually go in and look at how individual groups are treated, there's wildly different statistics within there, right? And so I can, if I have to be overly fair with my major group, I will be massively less fair with my minor groups, with my small groups within the data set, and those should even out to where my overall score is the fairness metrics you asked. But the individual groups have been treated very, very different. So the issue of the compass algorithm, the risk assessment, the argument was, oh, it's not fair. But the overall fairness score, that measure was hit. But when you looked at how individual groups were treated, you saw that there was an inverse relationship between the large group treatment and the smaller groups within the data sets treatment, right? That is a massive issue.
Does this go back to, just so I understand, you talked about the machine putting the most resources in
Mhm.
the largest data sets and less resources and less accuracy in the smaller data set. So is this kind of tied to that quality of AI?
It is. It is tied to that. There are ways to work around it, but they're not always implemented. But yeah, it's a function of how the technology works. Is that it's not going to be as efficient or accurate on every single part of the data set. So where it messes up in one area, it makes up in another area, right? Because it's the overall statistics that need to balance out. And then finally, I want to briefly touch on the ability to contest and redress, right? So a lot of AI systems make decisions, you don't know the decision's been made, right? Or they'll make a decision and then the people are like, well, the system made the decision, there's nothing I can do about it, right? So in order to be able to contest a decision or try to fix it, first I need to understand how it was made, right? So that's an issue of interpretability and explainability. Can I understand why the system made its decision? For a long time, all you heard about was black box algorithms, like these very opaque systems where you can't look into them and see why they're making the decisions that they're making, right? And the idea was they are massively more performant than the ones that let you see step by step why they're doing what they're doing. Well, the technology has advanced. And so now there isn't a trade-off between explainability and performance. The issue is the black box algorithms are just more used, right? And so the conversation needs to be had like, if I have an issue where I need to understand how the decision was made, there's probably an algorithm out there that could tell me that works just as well. I know you want to ask questions, but just let
I
me
have
get through this. I know, but we're running out of time. Okay.
questions about
Um,
this.
yes, but we're running out of time. And then the next thing I want to talk about is this issue of human in the loop. You'll hear, oh, but if there's a human in the loop, it'll be fine. Human in the loop oftentimes is a band-aid, right? Because you've got a person there who's supposed to, make decisions around, do we move forward with this decision or not? But oftentimes it's a rubber stamp. partially for the reasons of automation bias and automation complacency, partly because these decisions are happening quickly, partly because people don't necessarily know what's going on with the system when they're supposed to be making these decisions, right? So there's a move away from that human in the loop as a band-aid and towards active human agency, which is the idea that whenever there's an AI system that makes decisions about people, the users have the right to swiftly contest or rectify the AI enabled decision. So it's to empower people to have real agency in in the decision making of the algorithm. I know, I know, but let me get to the next section. Uh, okay, nope, not there. More risk. You can do it. Okay. So there's some additional risks, right? Those are just the first two. We're going to talk about two more. Reliability and confidentiality, right? So we'll go through reliability quickly. I think you might have some questions on confidentiality. So data is an issue for AI, right? And it is very difficult to get good data, to get clean data, and you cannot overcome bad data, right? That is what the AI is. That's the only world it knows. Like it can't extrapolate around what it sees. If that data is no good, that data is no good. Predictive inconsistency. There's a study, if you click this link, around, and it's actually in a legal context, that the AI makes different decisions based on the same facts pretty regularly, right? Like it's not necessarily going to make the exact same decision all the time because through its training process, the weighting is continuing to change. Different factors, different features are more or less important. And so an AI system is not static. So even given the same set of facts, if it's been around a little bit longer, it may make a slightly different decision or a massively different decision. It often depends on the types of data it's been fed and what it's learned from the data. And then finally, this issue of hallucination. Hallucination is essentially the fact that AI systems don't know how to say they're wrong and they don't know. And so they're always very confident when they give you an answer. And their purpose is to do a statistical analysis and then figure out what should be in this gap based on those statistics, right? And so it will say very confidently, what it thinks should be in that gap because it's done an analysis. Even if that analysis is flat out wrong, it's not going to say, "Oh, I only had a little bit of data," right? So there is this concept of confidence intervals. I believe we talked about that a little bit when we were prepping for this. There's a concept of confidence intervals, which is, an AI system can tell you what percentage of faith it has in its answer. But what we found is it can be very confident when it's wrong. so I believe that the issue with the ChatGPT lawyer is he asked several times, "Are you sure these are cases?" And it said, "Yes, I am absolutely certain," and then produced the cases. Because statistically, this is what the case should sound like, right? It doesn't really know how to say, "I don't know." And that is a massive issue with reliability, right?
It would seem that the developers should be incentivized to train the machine learning to know the level of confidence it should have in any given output and to report to the end user what level of confidence they should have. Why
It
wouldn't
is
we have that ability now?
it is a technical problem. So this is not a, "Oh, we don't want to do it." This is a technical problem that is rooted in how natural language processing and deep learning works. Like this is technically an issue that they're trying to solve. And you hear, "Oh, we're working on this, we're working on that." But the problem is you've created a machine and you've told it, "Give me a statistically accurate answer." And that's what it does. Like it doesn't have a concept of anything else to do, right? Like the main problems we have with AI is it does exactly what we tell it to do and only what we tell it to do. And we're not very good at telling it exactly what we want to do, right?
Well,
Um,
and I want to go back really quick. When you say that AI has been trained on the entire internet, what jumps out to me, and we talked a little bit about this offline, is there's a timing issue. So if AI is predicting an outcome, but it is not getting feedback as to whether its prediction was correct, or if it is getting that feedback, it's not getting it in the case of a legal scenario for years. How is it learning? It can't learn in real time like a human. It doesn't know, like a judge, whether they got their estimation on recidivism for a certain defendant correct. How do you
Yeah.
overcome that with AI?
Currently, I don't know that we are. These are questions that the law needs to ask, right? Like if you're doing these long scale predictions, how do you know if they're sufficient or not within the short term? I don't honestly know. Like I can't feed it data I don't have. So am I pulling data from different districts and different areas? And how reliable is that? How close is that to the data from my district and my area? Like it's the reason why AI systems just broke down during COVID. Like shopping systems, they couldn't. They had no. This was a black swan event. They had nothing in their data sets that could predict it, and then there was nothing to keep them up to speed with what was happening. Like it was just they were moving along like we were moving along and making their best guess like we were because they didn't have a pattern for it. And that I think that should be a flag for everyone. Like if there is no pattern in the data, then the AI system is no more reliable than you or me. Okay, and then confidentiality is another risk.
Huge risk. A huge
There
risk.
are
That is literally our foundation of our bar license in many instances. We breach privilege and we're on the hook.
exactly there are a lot of security concerns when you use an AI system. There are a lot of different ways to attack an AI system. I think we talked a little bit about prompt engineering, which is I can ask. There's a small prompt engineering that went viral, and it was like someone asked ChatGPT for some information, and it said, "Oh, I'm sorry, only my administrators can have that information." It said, "Oh, I'm an administrator," and it gave them the information. Now, mind you, that was very early on. They've gotten more sophisticated, but this idea of prompt injection and prompt engineering is I can ask a natural language processing system a question in the right way, and it will spill all its secrets, right? And then outside, yeah, anything that you have in your data center that you connected to it, it can spill, right? If someone asks the right way. And then the AI systems themselves increase your attack surface, right? Like, because there's a lot of different parts of an AI system, and someone can try to hack all of those different parts. And then, in addition to, so that's assuming you've attached the system to your legal systems. But there's also an issue of your employees using AI enabled tools outside of your purview. So there was a huge thing when ChatGPT came out of people just putting information in and allowing it to draft documentation. Well, they're putting confidential information, they're putting personally identifying information, privileged information, because it can draft a letter, not thinking once you put that information in there, especially in ChatGPT, it goes back to the servers, right? And it retrains on that data, which means if someone else asks the right question, that data becomes available to them. So there was a whole thing with a couple different manufacturing companies early into ChatGPT adoption, which was earlier this year, who found like their proprietary information on ChatGPT because an employee had put it in there trying to get some kind of information out of it, and then it pops up in a search. So that is an issue. Like if you put something in these systems, um, if they go back to training, then that info becomes available to other people. So ChatGPT specifically is putting like guardrails in and the ability to cut off the training process. But a lot of us don't know that. A lot of us don't have the paid accounts that will allow for that. And so you end up in a situation where you've broken privilege and confidentiality because you wanted a letter written quickly. And then the issue of anonymizing data. A lot of AI systems or a lot of people who work in tech will tell you, oh, we can anonymize the data and we send anonymized data packets. Well, come to find out, for like years and years, there have been studies that all I need is 3, 4, 5 data points in a data set, and I can de-anonymize the entire data set. Like it is not very difficult to de-anonymize data. So essentially, functionally, there's no real way to fully anonymize data. The only way to really do it is through encryption. And encryption is computationally expensive, which means your AWS or your cloud credits are going to go crazy for it. And it's a million times slower. And I take this because it's a quote. It's not just me saying this. It is literally a million times slower than normal computation on plain text information. So
So
it
at that
is
point, you might as well use the administrative staff to do whatever work you need the AI to do, right?
exactly because they're not a million times slower. So the issue of I can anonymize the data, you're going to have to encrypt it. It's going to cost you an awful lot to do so. And then, it's going to waste your time. Right. So I think that with all of these risks, the natural question is, okay, so if something goes wrong, who's liable? Uh, so essentially, the law as it currently stands is a lot of liability falls on people. It almost only falls on people. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is basically an immunity shield for online platforms. It states no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So basically, I am hosting this town hall forum, but I'm not responsible for what happens on it. So some horrific things have happened based off of social media and other and search engines, and those corporations have not been held liable, right? The responsibility always falls on the individual. And when you look at how we handle self-driving cars, which is another kind of AI, they have consistently ruled that it is the driver who is the only person responsible when the self-driving tech goes wrong. Even when you can prove that the engineers made decisions that made it functionally impossible for the human at the wheel to stop this accident, the human at the wheel has been held liable for the accident. So this link is about when the Uber self-driving car killed someone, because the techs had made it to where the car couldn't really recognize the person walking across the street, and then had taken off automatic braking because it was too jerky. So they took off like the fail safe, and then the person in the seat was only given like 10 seconds to make a decision, which is much shorter than the normal human decision window. But the person in the car, the driver, went to jail. No one else got prosecuted, right? So the current legal landscape is in a personal liability is the default for issues or harms when it comes to AI technology.
Well, and not everybody has had the benefit of your personal friendship and hours of discussions on some of the horrific things that have happened and liability that hasn't passed to the holders of the algorithms. But could you give an example of something that has been a big scale problem?
So we'll talk about it in session 3, but the genocide in Myanmar was traced specifically to Facebook. The divisiveness on Facebook, as soon as basically they launched Facebook, they didn't have content analysts, like the people who go through and pull off like bad content like we have in the US, or say fact checking any of that kind of stuff. They didn't have those people who spoke the languages in that country. They made no effort to really put any kind of guardrails or protections in the system, and it just it created a level of divisiveness, and it just fomented genocide, and that genocide happened, and Facebook has faced no legal penalty for it.
That's
Yeah,
horrific.
yeah, we'll talk about that in our third session, societal impacts. Um, Professional liability. So attorneys are ultimately responsible for the services they render. So coming back to the poor unfortunate ChatGPT lawyer, he faced disciplinary action for believing the system and not doing his own research and providing false information to the court, because you're ultimately responsible for the information you provide to the court.
And
There was
just briefly, in case somebody didn't hear the story, can you give a brief overview of this attorney's error in judgment in using AI?
He used ChatGPT for legal research. it came up with perfect cases that really like solidified his point in the law. He files it. He actually was an attorney working with another attorney who filed for him because he wasn't barred in that state. So they filed this. The defense attorney is like, we can't find these cases, or the other side is, we can't find these cases. And he's like, oh, they exist. And so the court was like, well, they can't find the cases. What's going on? He's like, there exists, and he gives like he prints out versions of them and sends them to the court. The court's like, half of this doesn't even make any sense. It's gobbledygook because ChatGPT can't write a whole case. At some point, it's going to default to foolishness. And he's like, at no point did you read this? And he's like, oh, but I asked it. And he gives his chat, like his a picture of his chat where he's like, are these real cases? And ChatGPT is like, yes, they're real cases. And he thought that was sufficient. And the judge was like, well, why do you think you couldn't find them elsewhere? He's like, I just thought they were really hard to find. So he ended up facing disciplinary action, ended up having to pay $5,000, which is pretty good considering. But this is kind of a funny-ish case. But in the future, when you're using AI and you miss a case or you use the wrong case and it costs someone dearly, they go to jail, they lose their house, things of that nature, it's going to come back to you and your license. And the important thing to get from this case is there was no shared liability discussion around ChatGPT. Nobody went to OpenAI and said, you're going to have to joint and severally liable for my professional license. Your professional license is your own, and you're responsible for what you produce with it. And then finally, corporate liability. So if you take a moment to read the terms of use, this here is the terms of use, I believe, of ChatGPT. Each of these technologies that you're using are going to have indemnity clauses, and they tend to be pretty ridiculous. Like, it is not just hold harmless, but every upstream user, so everyone who built on that system until it got to you and you got harmed, has to defend them in a lawsuit. So you're going to have to go through every layer of legal representation until you get to them, and they have their own massive war chest. So it's not saying it's not possible to get shared liability from, at a corporate level, but it's going to be very, very difficult, and it's intentionally made very, very difficult.
I mean,
So
even if these are free services and the provisions are arguably unenforceable, you're still incurring all of the, prosecution costs, attorney's fees to get there, and they'll
yeah,
probably outspend you anyway.
and you're going to have to argue it all the way up the chain because you're probably not going to be harmed directly by the product that came out by OpenAI or Google or Microsoft, right? You're going to be harmed by the tools that they built, that people built on top of that. So you've got to go through those tool developers before you can get to the big dogs. It's going to cost. Right? So, given all of that, we have to ask ourselves, is AI the proper tool for the job? And how do we even figure it out, right? What kind of questions do we need to ask to figure out, like, should I even be considering using AI? The first thing is obviously the considerations we've already discussed: bias, values, reliability, confidentiality. Then you need to consider transparency. Like, how much do you need to understand about the decision-making process? And does the algorithm that's being used here actually give you access to that level of information? So yes, as attorneys, you're gonna have to ask questions about algorithms, but you don't need source code. I don't know where that came from. I need the source code. You're not gonna do anything with source code. The source code doesn't mean anything. The data and the source code together produce a result. Neither one in and of themselves is going to be sufficient to give you the information that you need, right? But you do need to ask specific questions. So
So,
is the
so let's say we wind up in litigation and we do need to know something about the underlying algorithm because that's literally part of the proximate cause, etc., right?
Mhm.
Who do we hire as an expert who takes the data that we presumably are allowed to obtain from the AI provider? Who's the expert on that? Do we
Data
have to be
scientists?
a person? Do we have to have a translator? How does that work?
Yeah, it's going to have to be someone who understands data science. But what I'm trying to give you is information that doesn't get to that doesn't require you to go that deep. right? Like if you're deep into the weeds and you need to understand what is the weight for this feature versus that feature, you're going to want to bring in a data scientist, right? But before you even buy, right? Before you even decide to use, or if, as you're doing your initial discovery, the questions that you want to ask are actually a bit broader and more accessible, right? And so, I need to understand the level of transparency. If I needed transparency, did you even have the type of algorithm that would allow me the transparency I needed, right? Um, I need to figure out explainability. Like for what I'm using this technology for, do I need parts of this decision making process explained in English to other people? And who does it need to be explained to, right? And does the system I'm using allow or provide that type of explanation? So a lot of AI systems, as I said, are black box, but they have tools. One is called Shop. There are a couple other different tools that you can use as a kind of layover that will help pull out explainability from this technology, like from an opaque system. So it's not just, well, I use the wrong algorithm, I can't give you any information. No, if you put in the time, effort, and money, you can put an overlay on that system that will give me the information that I need, right? And if I'm in a case and I need to understand, how the AI system made the decision it made, well, those are the kind of tools that you would want someone to run on top of this technology to give you an understanding of how it's making decisions. Um, then there's this issue of automation risk. Um, what you don't think about with AI is not working at the speed of attorneys. AI is built to work at the speed of light. It is supposed to be a fast, high-speed decision-making system, which means oversight slows it down, right? Like that's not its key use case. So if you have to step in every second and approve this and approve that, is AI the proper tool? I don't know. Like if you have to make a lot of decisions and a lot of people have to make decisions, AI is probably not the best suited for that, right? Because it wants to move. And then you need to consider that when things go wrong with AI, they go wrong very, very fast and very, very far. So you need to figure out what is the risk for a negative impact or a wrong decision, right? Like if I'm making a wrong decision about what recommending what video someone wants to watch next, okay. But if I'm making a wrong decision about someone being allowed to get a loan or move into an apartment, that matters, right? And then finally, because of the things we discussed before about automation bias, about speed, about transparency, and people not even knowing a lot of times that AI decisions are being made, a lot of the decisions that are made around AI are functionally permanent. And when that decision is made, trying to fix the data and fix the decision is very difficult. Like, think about how hard it is to get a correction on your credit report. It's like that, right? Like as soon as you fix it in one place, it pops up in another because it's in another piece of data and it just continues to go and go and go. It's very difficult to fix data in an AI system. And then the final question, which I think is the first question for me, is are there non-AI alternatives? Is there a way to do this like the slow way, right? Like the easy, the simple way. The best solution is often the easiest. And so are you overlooking simple, high quality solutions? And so I tagged this ESAS. It's a tool that was developed by a Florida lawyer. There's a gap in understanding of how judges rule. Different judges in different jurisdictions rule on sentencing for defendants. And he recognized this gap and was like, okay, so how do I provide that information? And he created, it was almost a spreadsheet kind of tool where you can just kind of point and click and see this judge in this jurisdiction with these kind of sentencing factors gives out this sentence. Very simple. You don't have to change your back end. You don't have to do anything different. You just pay for this tool, you get this information, you make it happen, right? So I think a lot of times we jump to the AI solution, but we need to be jumping to the best solution to solve the problem.
Of when a legal research tool that I use and subscribe to came out with AI. I had a big case writing a big memo of law, used the AI, thought, oh, great, I know what there is to know. And about an hour later, I'm like, I'm not comfortable. I'm going to go back and do the research. The tool had missed key cases that completely changed the theory of the case. So that goes back to natural language processing, just maybe not being where it needs to be yet. And that makes me nervous. And then, when you talk about alternatives, I don't know if you've read the Michael Lewis book, The Undoing Project. I feel like I might have sent it to you, Masheika.
You sent it to me. I haven't read
It's
it.
this wonderful book that analyzes research on how we come to decisions. Are we making decisions in the right way based on the right data as humans? And one of the theories that it proposes is that because human professionals are inherently subjective, a basic algorithm with a sufficient amount of data is going to generate a more accurate result every time. And that is, I feel like we've taken AI and gone way beyond that proposition. I agree that data-based decisions make sense, but AI is going well beyond data-based decisions. And I feel like that's what we as lawyers perhaps aren't getting. It's not
Yeah,
just data-based decisions that it's producing.
yeah. I
There's
think
other
the
decisions.
Yeah, I think the true uses of AI or the best uses of AI are like these kind of like industrial back-end situations, right? Where you're dealing with repeatable processes, digital twin technology, manufacturing, right? So I understand everything, the temperature, how things move, and I can program that in and then create an AI simulation that essentially, recreates that in different areas, right? AI is a simulative technology. That's what it was meant to do. It's very it is not actually possible to fully simulate human behavior, what humans think, what they believe. But we've gotten to this point where we can math what we say and what we write. And so we take that to say, now I can extrapolate from that thoughts of what you believe, what you will do. So we've taken the technology and pulled it into an area where it's not necessarily suited. Human behavior is by nature messy and conflicting and very hard to predict. We can't predict. We can't predict our own behavior, right? But like from outside looking in, a machine is supposed to look at my face and all these micro signals and know what I'm feeling. Whereas I am conflicted within myself and I can't tell you what I'm feeling every moment of the day, right? And so it's just we've gotten it's a certain level of hubris, right? Where we've gotten to this point where we've gotten really good at programming these machines. Humans can't be that much more complicated, right? Like we can feed it this info and it'll understand. In a legal context, it's the same kind of thing. Like the law is messy and amorphous, and in your case, other people might not have used those cases in a while, and the system is optimized towards the cases people use. And so it's not that it didn't understand your query, it provided you the things that had the highest statistical probability based on what it's seen in its data set. You wanted to
Because
use different
it's
cases.
putting the most power or neurons
Yeah,
toward the most frequently asked questions and most
yeah.
frequent responses.
So yeah, interesting. So let's get into, okay, if I want to use an AI system, if I go through all of that and I realize, well, it is the proper tool, and there are contexts where AI is the proper tool. I like it for backend systems, operational processes. I think it's a great tool for those kinds of things, right? So if AI is the right kind of tool, what do I need to have in my corporation, in my firm, to allow me to implement it properly, right? Staffing and expertise. A lot of people think, well, I'll get a contractor in, they'll set it up, and then a third party group will maintain it. That's just a recipe for disaster. Like you cannot set it and forget it with technology. Like you need expertise to get it set up properly. You're going to have to rework your internal processes to account for the extra decision making, governance, all those kinds of things. So that's going to be more staffing and expertise, like making sure you have the right people in place. You're going to have to train your staff, and then you're going to have to maintain the system to some degree because you have to overlook what other people, that third party contractor doesn't know your stuff like you know your stuff. You got to overlook that, right? You got to make sure it's doing right. So proper AI maintenance requires deep knowledge of your data and use cases. So you're going to have to lean into that. you're going to have expertise for that, right? Infrastructure. In order to implement an AI system internally, you've got to rework your entire data infrastructure. You've got to have data lineage. I speak as a data product manager for this, but you have to have data lineage, traceability. You have to pipe the right data and only the right data to the AI pipeline. Um, and that requires a system setup change. And then there's cloud computing costs, because every time you're asking it to train, every time it's making decisions, when you maintain it, all of that costs money in your cloud account, and those costs add up. And then internal controls, like I'm putting this new system, I have to have data governance around it. I have to consider regulatory compliance, and that this system allows me to maintain my compliance. There have to be access controls on both the models and the data, right? Like everybody can't like get to this stuff, right? Like I need to figure out who can get to it, implement that technically and policy wise, and
They
then
can't just
security.
say they can't just say they're an administrator.
Exactly. And the security protocols, right? Like, see, these are just a couple of the areas that I'm raising where you're going to need to implement new systems or update systems and processes to accommodate this AI system. Then there's going to be some costs associated with all of that, with maintaining, getting the capacity and then maintaining it. And you got to weigh those against what you're getting out of the business impact, right? What's your ROI? And then when you use an off-the-shelf tool, you assume, oh, that'll make it less, but not necessarily, because you may have to do more work to oversee what's happening outside of your company than if you'd have just brought it in-house, right? And then previous performance, right? Like, can you see that another firm, that another firm has used this technology and it's worked well for them? Like, has it been successful? And if it has, what was their organizational capacity? Like, how did they set up their company to be ready for it? Um, and then last
I,
slide.
I want to bring that kind of relevant to who might be in attendance. I can't imagine that any small to mid-sized firms are thinking about implementing AI, but I can imagine that it's being marketed to court systems, to DCAs, to clerk systems, and that's where it does get a little scary if it's sold as a product without the end user having input into what they're receiving.
I'm gonna push back because mid-sized firms is the new gold. Like that's where
Really?
people are pushing. Yeah, because mid-sized firms have staffing issues, right? They can't get all the people to do all the things. So hey, bring this AI assistant in. Make the staff that you have more productive, and like try to cover some of what you've lost during, losing staffing during COVID, or not being able to pay the salaries that people are demanding now. Like, so no, this is a prime area, is the mid-sized firm, for AI systems to come in. And coming in, like you're already using Lexus, so why not use Lexus Plus, right? Like you're already using Westlaw, so why not use, so upselling you on their AI systems kind of things. And then there's some startups who are really aggressive, who are trying to move into this space as well.
That gives me a lot of pause about security concerns. We have here, for example, a cloud-based system. We have the firewalls. We have all the things. We have the cutting edge, security, because I'm paranoid about these things. But I don't know that we could protect our data in that scenario, because we're not even aware of the type of hacker maneuvers out there, right? That's what you said earlier.
Yeah, so this is why I think bar associations can help, right? These are the areas where I think they can help. So the first thing I think is no one is asking lawyers what they need help with. And there's a range, right? From please God automate this to this would be nice to automate, right? But has anyone ever asked you what you want automated, what should and shouldn't be automated? The red lines, like what should never be automated? When is a tool crossing the line to unlicensed practice of law? So there's an issue of do not pay, which has won all kind of American Bar Association awards. Everyone was really high on it. And then they said, we're just gonna have someone put our AI on their headset while they go to virtual court, and we'll be their assistant while they're in court. And he publicized that, the president, and everyone freaked out. And there's all kinds of lawsuits, unlicensed practice law. They were trying to do it in California. He immediately got hit with lawsuits. But I don't say that that's his fault. I say that's our fault, because we haven't defined what is all unlawful practice of law. When is an AI system When is this tool stepping across the line? You've got to sue, you got to do something and go across that line to get sued to find out. We need to do better. We need to provide um, developers more direction, and we need to provide lawyers more direction. So providing expert information, like there should be a repository of the tools that are out there and what kind of AI they use. Like these questions that I've been asking should be available for you to pull from the state or the National Bar Associations. And then what are success stories? Right? Because everyone's being sold on what AI can do, but what has it done? This technology is not stinking brand new. Other people have implemented it. Like lots of people have implemented it. Has it worked for them? Like, does anyone know? Because I've not seen case studies, right? Um,
Maybe you could share the Watson story with the physicians. I think that's really relevant to lawyers' consideration of implementing AI tools.
right. IBM Watson, it was the AI that beat, I think, Jeopardy or something like it. It was a huge win. It beat humans on a game, and everyone's like, "Oh, this is great! It understands language." Clearly, the easiest or the best implementation of this is going to be to diagnose medical injuries. Like we have a shortage of primary care physicians. We can use this technology to do first level diagnosis. It'll be great. It'll shore up the system. It'll help people who don't have access to doctors. It'll be great. So the medical establishment is very clear that you're going to have to test stuff and get licensed before they let you use their stuff in the medical profession. So they had two very large scale, like hundreds of $1,000 large scale studies with IBM Watson doing diagnosis. And it failed miserably because it would just randomly pick the most obscure thing that you could possibly have, like for your symptoms. It couldn't diagnose a common cold. You always had something crazy. Like for some reason, they couldn't get it to understand that the easiest solution is probably the best. It failed in back-to-back studies, and you didn't hear about IBM Watson for a very long time. And I believe in this, I have a link to a Nature article where they're saying AI has to be licensed as a medical device. Like you have to go through the rigor, you have to go through the process, you have to prove that this works in our industry. And a lot of the tools that are used in medicine have to be are licensed as medical devices, right? Like they're just not selling stuff to, the front desk or the procurement officer. Like they have to go through the process and get licensed in medicine, right? We're not requiring that. So this is my, the bar associations should be in the same position as the medical associations in saying what we will and will not allow in, being first line of defense so that bad tech doesn't get, proliferated throughout the system. Yeah, so providing this information and but also, making sure that they form a barrier on what is allowed in the practice of law. Um, and then I just want to talk a little bit about, the fiduciary duty and the laws to our clients first. And a lot of this technology is sold. You don't hear anything about clients. You don't hear anything about this making life better for them. It's about your efficiency, your bottom line as a firm owner. But it's for the bar to remind us that our licenses are based on client first. We're a profession. We don't do arms races. I don't care if OpenAI makes a couple $1 million on an AI system in the law. I'm not trying to help them, be better companies or more solvent companies. I don't do arms races around technology. Like there are still attorneys who write things out long form and use faxes. So why are we now jumping into an AI arms race, like as if this technology is somehow different than all other technology, and we can skip all the things that we typically do to better? Because ultimately, we are responsible for the services we render. And if attorneys are not involved in the conversation, if our bar associations aren't leading the charge and helping us have a seat at the table, then we end up with, ChatGPT lawyers and Compass algorithms and other tools that are way more negative and cast a poor light on our profession than those that could actually do the things that we want them to do in the way that we need them to do it.
Thank you. I have about 20 more questions myself. We didn't get any questions from the chat. I think, first of all, thank you, Masheika, for your time today. again, the goal was to teach us more about what we don't know and hopefully encourage people to get involved through bar associations to question some of the products that are being solicited to us. I encourage anyone who has a follow-up question, we can continue the talk on Massey Law Group's LinkedIn page where Masheika will answer those questions. And we will hopefully see some of you at next week's session, how AI affects our clients, which is going to be next Friday at 11 Eastern. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all.